The bullet entered my shoulder at a 45-degree downward angle, but my stepfather was standing on level ground 20 feet behind me. My mother looked the sheriff straight in the eye and called it a hunting accident, but the trajectory doesn't lie, and neither does the forensic evidence I spent 3 years gathering to prove he tried to kill me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria Ashford, and if you're watching this, prepare yourself for a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty, small-town corruption, and how far someone will go to protect a lie. Have you ever survived something that everyone around you insists never happened? Have you ever been gaslit so thoroughly that you started to doubt your own memories of nearly dying? Because that's exactly what happened to me in the woods outside Millbrook Falls, Montana, on October 15th, 2019. And what happened next, the cover-up, the manipulation, the systematic erasure of evidence, that's what nearly destroyed me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that morning, because every detail matters when you're trying to prove attempted murder disguised as a family tragedy. I was 28 years old, working as a wildlife photographer for the Montana Department of Natural Resources. I'd moved back to Millbrook Falls after my divorce, partly to be closer to my mother Diane, partly because the rent was cheap and the mountains were calling. My stepfather, Raymond Cortez, had been part of our lives for 12 years by then. He married my mom when I was 16, and I'd always felt like an intruder in their perfect little world. Raymond owned Cortez Construction, the biggest contracting company in Millbrook Falls. In a town of 3,000 people, that made him important. He built half the houses, employed a quarter of the men, and donated generously to the sheriff's re-election campaigns. He was charming, successful, and according to everyone who mattered in our little corner of Montana, the perfect husband for my widowed mother. But I knew things about Raymond that others didn't. I'd seen the way he looked at me when my mother wasn't watching. I'd caught him going through my mail when I lived at home during college breaks. I'd noticed how conversations stopped when I entered rooms, how my mother's friends would give me pitying looks they thought I couldn't see. There was something off about Raymond Cortez, something that made my skin crawl, but I could never put my finger on exactly what. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The hunting trip wasn't my idea. My mother suggested it over dinner the night before, her voice bright and artificial in the way it got when she was trying too hard. "Raymond thinks you two should spend some quality time together," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe go hunting up at Copper Ridge, like a bonding experience." I should have said no. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to decline, but I was trying to be the good daughter, trying to make peace with the man who'd married my mother and given her the stability she craved after my father's death. So I agreed, even though I'd only been hunting a handful of times and wasn't particularly good at it. We left the house at 5 in the morning, driving Raymond's F-150 up the winding mountain roads to his favorite hunting spot. The conversation was stilted, forced. He kept asking me about my job, my plans, whether I intended to stay in Millbrook Falls long term. At the time, I thought he was making an effort. Now, I realize he was gathering intelligence. Copper Ridge was beautiful that morning, crisp and clear, with the aspens turning gold and the morning mist hanging low in the valleys. We parked at the old logging road and hiked about a mile into the woods, Raymond leading the way with his .308 rifle slung across his shoulder. I carried a borrowed .243 that I'd shot maybe 6 times in my entire life. We set up about 50 yards apart, Raymond positioning himself behind a fallen log, while I took cover behind a cluster of pine trees. The plan was to wait for elk, though I privately hoped we wouldn't see any. I'd rather spend the morning taking photographs than shooting at beautiful animals, but I didn't say that to Raymond. I was still trying to be the cooperative stepdaughter. For the first hour, nothing happened. I took some photos of the sunrise filtering through the trees, occasionally glancing back to where Raymond was positioned. He seemed patient, focused, like he belonged in these woods in a way I never would. I was starting to relax, thinking maybe this wasn't such a bad idea after all. Maybe we could actually have a decent relationship. That's when I heard movement in the brush ahead of me. I raised my rifle and peered through the scope, seeing a flash of brown between the trees. My heart started pounding the way it always did when I was nervous. I'd never actually shot at a living thing before, and I wasn't sure I could go through with it even if I had a clear shot. I was adjusting my position, trying to get a better view, when the world exploded. The sound came first, a crack that echoed off the mountains like thunder. Then the impact, a sledgehammer blow to my left shoulder that spun me around and dropped me to the ground. The pain came a split second later, white-hot and consuming, radiating down my arm and across my chest. I remember lying there in the pine needles, staring up at the canopy of trees, trying to understand what had happened. My shoulder felt wrong, detached somehow, and there was something warm spreading across my jacket. I tried to sit up and nearly blacked out from the pain. "Victoria!" Raymond's voice panicked and far away. "Victoria, are you okay?" I could hear him crashing through the underbrush, calling my name. I tried to answer but could only manage a weak groan. The pain was incredible, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I could feel blood soaking through my jacket, warm and sticky against my skin. Raymond appeared above me, his face pale with shock. Oh God, what happened? Are you hurt?" I think I've been shot," I managed to whisper. He knelt beside me, his hands shaking as he examined my shoulder. "We need to get you to a hospital. Can you move? Can you stand?" Everything after that was a blur of pain and confusion. Raymond helped me to my feet, supporting most of my weight as we made our way back to the truck. He kept talking, a constant stream of reassurance and apologies, but I was too focused on staying conscious to really process what he was saying. The drive down the mountain was a nightmare. Every bump in the road sent fresh waves of agony through my shoulder. Raymond was on his phone with 911, explaining that there had been a hunting accident, that his stepdaughter had been shot, that we were driving to meet the ambulance. His voice was calm, controlled, exactly what you'd expect from someone handling an emergency. We met the ambulance at the base of the mountain, and after that, everything became a medical blur. Paramedics, IV lines, morphine that made the pain bearable for the first time in hours. I drifted in and out of consciousness during the helicopter ride to Billings General Hospital, vaguely aware of medical personnel discussing my condition in urgent professional tones. The surgery took 4 hours. The bullet had shattered my collarbone and nicked an artery, but miraculously missed anything vital. Dr. Sarah Brennan, the trauma surgeon, told me later that I was incredibly lucky. A few inches to the right and the bullet would have hit my heart. A few inches down and it would have severed the brachial artery. As it was, I'd need physical therapy and would probably have limited mobility in my left arm, but I was alive. My mother was waiting when I woke up in recovery, her eyes red from crying. Raymond stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, the picture of a concerned stepfather. They'd driven straight to Billings as soon as they got the call, she told me. They'd been so scared, so worried they might lose me. "What happened?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube. My mother glanced at Raymond, then back at me. "You were shot, honey. A hunting accident. Raymond thinks maybe you moved into his line of fire without realizing it, or maybe there was another hunter in the area. The sheriff's department is looking into it, but these things happen sometimes." Even through the fog of painkillers, something about that explanation bothered me. I remembered being positioned ahead of Raymond, not between him and any potential target. I remembered the direction the shot had come from, the way the impact had spun me around. But the morphine made it hard to think clearly, and I was too exhausted to argue. Sheriff Tom Kellerman came to see me the next day. He was a big man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, someone who'd known my family for years. He asked me to walk him through what had happened, taking careful notes as I recounted the morning's events. "Now, Victoria," Sheriff Kellerman said when I finished, "I want you to think carefully. Did you move from your original position at any point? Maybe step to the side or move forward without thinking about it?" I tried to remember, but everything before the shot was fuzzy. "I don't think so. I was trying to get a better look at something in the brush, but I don't remember moving." Sheriff Kellerman nodded sympathetically. "These accidents happen more often than you think. Hunters get excited, lose track of where their partners are positioned. Raymond feels terrible about it, of course. He's beside himself with guilt." "But Sheriff," I struggled to sit up straighter. "The shot came from behind me, I'm sure of that. And Raymond was positioned behind me, not to the side." "Now, honey," Sheriff Kellerman's voice took on a patronizing tone. "You've been through a trauma. Sometimes our memories of these events aren't as reliable as we think they are. The important thing is that you're going to be okay." Something cold settled in my stomach. It wasn't just the dismissal of my concerns, it was the way he said it, like he'd already decided what had happened and wasn't interested in any version that didn't fit his narrative. Over the next few days, as I recovered in the hospital, more details emerged. The victim. That phrase stuck with me. Somehow, in the span of 48 hours, the narrative had shifted. I was no longer the person who'd been shot. I was the careless hunter who'd caused an accident by moving into the wrong position at the wrong time. Raymond wasn't a potential suspect. He was the traumatized stepfather dealing with the guilt of accidentally shooting his wife's daughter. My mother bought into this version completely. She hovered over Raymond during those hospital days, comforting him, telling everyone who'd listen how destroyed he was by what had happened. "He loves Victoria like his own daughter," she kept saying. "This is killing him." But there were moments when I caught Raymond looking at me with an expression that wasn't guilt or remorse. It was something colder, more calculating. Like he was studying me, evaluating whether I believed the story or whether I might become a problem. When Dr. Brennan came to discuss my discharge, she pulled out the surgical notes and showed me something that made my blood run cold. "The trajectory of the bullet was quite steep," she explained, pointing to a diagram. "It entered your shoulder at approximately a 45-degree downward angle. That's consistent with the shot coming from significantly higher ground or from someone much taller than you." "But Raymond and I are about the same height, and we were both on level ground." Dr. Brennan frowned. "That is odd. Perhaps the bullet ricocheted off something first, or maybe the terrain was more uneven than you remember." But I knew the terrain. I'd been there, lived through every second of that morning. Raymond had been behind me and slightly to the right, on ground that was level with mine. For a bullet to enter my shoulder at that angle, he would have had to have been standing on a platform or shooting from up in a tree. Or he would have had to have been standing directly over me. That night, alone in my hospital room, with the lights dimmed and the hallway quiet, I replayed every moment of that morning over and over in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something was terribly wrong with the official story. Raymond's positioning, the trajectory of the bullet, his immediate presence at the scene. None of it added up to an accident. But every time I tried to voice these concerns to my mother, to Sheriff Kellerman, even to Dr. Brennan, I was met with the same patronizing dismissal. I was traumatized, confused, letting my imagination run wild. These things happened. Raymond was devastated. I needed to focus on healing, not on conspiracy theories. By the time I was discharged a week later, the case was already closed. Hunting accident, the report concluded. No charges filed. Raymond Cortez had been cleared of any wrongdoing. His reputation intact, his standing in the community unaffected. But I knew the truth. Even if no one else would listen, even if everyone I trusted was telling me I was wrong, I knew that my stepfather had tried to kill me in those woods. The question was, could I prove it? And more importantly, why had he wanted me dead? As I walked out of Billings General Hospital that gray October morning, my arm in a sling and my shoulder screaming with every step, I made myself a promise. I was going to find the truth about what happened on Copper Ridge. I was going to gather the evidence that Sheriff Kellerman was too lazy or too corrupt to collect. And I was going to make sure that Raymond Cortez faced justice for what he'd done to me. I had no idea that this decision would consume the next 3 years of my life, cost me almost everything I cared about, and ultimately reveal secrets about my family that were far darker and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. But that's a story for what comes next. For now, all you need to know is this: the trajectory doesn't lie, and neither do I. My stepfather shot me, and I'm going to prove it. Coming home from the hospital, I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. The real nightmare began when I started asking questions that no one in Millbrook Falls wanted to answer. Because what I discovered wasn't just about one hunting accident. It was about 12 years of systematic manipulation, financial fraud, and a pattern of behavior that made Raymond Cortez far more dangerous than anyone realized. But let me take you back to the beginning, because understanding why Raymond wanted me dead requires understanding how he'd been positioning himself to destroy my family long before he ever pulled that trigger. It started in 2007, 3 years after my dad died in a car accident. I was 16, angry, and drowning in grief that my mother didn't know how to handle. Dad had been everything to me: my camping partner, my photography teacher, the one who encouraged my dreams of working with.
Raymond was all charm and presence. He brought my mother flowers after their first business meeting, called her just to check in, started showing up at community events where he knew she'd be. Within 6 months, they were dating. Within a year, he'd proposed. I hated him from the beginning, but not for any logical reason I could articulate at 16. He was perfectly nice to me, always asking about school, offering to help with homework, including me in conversations. But there was something underneath his perfect stepfather act that set every alarm bell in my head ringing. The way his eyes would go cold when my mother wasn't looking, the way he'd touch my shoulder just a little too long, stand just a little too close, the way he seemed to be cataloging every detail of our house, our finances, our routines. When they got married in 2008, Raymond moved into our house, the house my father had built with his own hands, the house where I'd grown up. Suddenly, everything changed. My mother started dressing differently, talking differently. She began deferring to Raymond on decisions she'd always made herself. When I complained about the changes, she'd get defensive. "Raymond's just trying to help us build a better life," she'd say. "Your father would want us to be happy." But Dad would have hated Raymond. Dad valued honesty and hard work and quiet integrity. Raymond was all flash and ambition and carefully crafted personas. Dad built things to last forever. Raymond built things to look impressive and fall apart after the warranty expired. The financial manipulation started almost immediately, though I didn't understand it at the time. Raymond convinced my mother to refinance the house, explaining that interest rates were low and they could use the equity to invest in his business. He talked her into taking out a life insurance policy with him as the beneficiary to protect their family's future. He started managing all their finances, claiming he was better with numbers and investments. "Let me handle the money stuff, honey," I heard him tell her one night. "You work hard enough. This is what husbands do." What I didn't know then was that Raymond was methodically transferring assets, restructuring debts, and positioning himself to benefit if anything happened to my mother or to me. The life insurance wasn't just on my mother. When I turned 18, Raymond convinced her to take out a policy on me too. College kids take risks. Car accidents, party incidents. It's just being responsible parents. The policy was for $500,000, with my mother as the primary beneficiary and Raymond as the secondary. I found out about it by accident when I turned 21 and needed my birth certificate for something. The insurance documents were in the same file, and seeing my name on a life insurance policy I'd never agreed to made my skin crawl. When I confronted my mother about it, she got flustered and defensive. "It's just a precaution, Victoria. Raymond handles these things because I don't understand insurance. He's looking out for our family." "But Mom, I never consented to this. How can you take out a life insurance policy on someone without their permission?" She couldn't answer that question, which should have been my first clue that something was deeply wrong. The pattern escalated during my college years. Every time I came home for breaks, more things had changed. Family photos featuring my father disappeared from the walls, replaced by pictures of Raymond's achievements, ribbon cuttings, charity golf tournaments, Chamber of Commerce awards. My father's workshop in the garage was cleared out and converted into Raymond's home office. Even my childhood bedroom was slowly transformed, my personal items packed away to make room for guests. But it was the financial pressure that really worried me. My mother, who'd always been careful with money, started making comments about budgets being tight. College tuition became a source of stress in a way it never had been before. When I asked to see the college fund my father had established, I was told it had been reinvested in opportunities with better returns. "Raymond is very good with investments," my mother assured me. "He's growing your college money much faster than it would have grown in a boring savings account." Except when I graduated and needed help with student loans, there was no money available. The college fund had apparently been lost in some kind of business investment that hadn't worked out. Raymond was very sorry, very apologetic, but these things happen in the business world. At least you had your degree, right? That's when I started paying attention to the financial details of Raymond's life. His construction company was successful, but not successful enough to explain the lifestyle he and my mother were living. The expensive cars, the European vacations, the constant home renovations. When I asked subtle questions about where the money was coming from, I got vague answers about diversified investments and business opportunities. It wasn't until after my divorce in 2018, when I moved back to Millbrook Falls temporarily, that I started understanding the scope of Raymond's deception. My mother was working longer hours at the bank, constantly stressed about money, despite the fact that Raymond's business was supposedly thriving. When I offered to help with grocery money, she broke down crying and admitted they were struggling. "The business has been slow," she whispered. "Raymond says it's just a temporary downturn, but the bills keep coming, and I don't know how we're going to manage the mortgage payment next month." "What about all those investments he made with Dad's money?" Her face went white. "What investments?" That's when I realized my mother didn't actually know what Raymond had done with our family's assets. She'd trusted him completely, signed whatever he put in front of her, and never asked questions. When I started digging deeper, what I found made me physically ill. The house my father built, the one that should have been paid off years ago, had been mortgaged and remortgaged repeatedly. Each time, Raymond had extracted more equity, claiming he was investing it wisely. But there were no investments. The money had simply disappeared into Raymond's personal accounts, used to fund his lavish lifestyle and prop up his failing business. My mother's retirement account, built up over 20 years of careful saving, had been cleaned out. The life insurance policies, including mine, had been modified multiple times, with Raymond increasing the death benefits and changing the terms in ways that benefited only him. Most disturbing of all, I discovered that Raymond had been forging my mother's signature on financial documents for years. Bank statements, loan applications, investment paperwork. Her name was on dozens of documents she'd never actually signed. When I tried to talk to my mother about what I'd found, she couldn't handle it. The betrayal was too massive, too complete. She'd built her entire life around trusting Raymond, and accepting the truth would mean admitting that she'd been catastrophically wrong about the man she'd married. "You're just looking for problems," she said, her voice shaking. "Raymond loves us. He's worked so hard to take care of our family. I won't let you tear him down with wild accusations." But the accusations weren't wild, and I had documentation to prove it. Bank records showing mysterious transfers, forged signatures that didn't match my mother's handwriting, investment accounts that existed on paper but had no actual assets. a web of financial fraud so complex that it would take forensic accountants years to untangle. That's when I understood why Raymond had wanted me dead in those woods. I wasn't just his stepdaughter anymore. I was a threat. I was the one person in the family with the education and objectivity to see through his schemes. I was asking the right questions and getting too close to the truth. And with my mother's deteriorating health, she'd been diagnosed with early-stage diabetes and high blood pressure, conditions exacerbated by years of financial stress. I was potentially the only obstacle between Raymond and a very comfortable widowhood. The life insurance policies weren't precautions. They were investments Raymond was planning to collect on. But there was something else, something even darker that I wouldn't fully understand until months later. Raymond hadn't just been stealing from my family, he'd been using his position at the bank, his relationship with my mother, to commit fraud on a much larger scale. Customer information, loan applications, elderly clients who trusted Diane and by extension trusted Raymond, all of it had been part of a scheme that reached far beyond our little family tragedy. The hunting accident wasn't just attempted murder. It was attempted murder designed to silence a witness who was getting too close to exposing a criminal enterprise that could have destroyed dozens of families in Millbrook Falls. And Sheriff Kellerman, he wasn't just incompetent or lazy, he was part of it. The rushed investigation, the refusal to test Raymond's rifle, the dismissal of my concerns about the trajectory, all of it was designed to protect a man who had been systematically looting our community for over a decade. As I sat in my childhood bedroom that first night home from the hospital, my shoulder throbbing and my head spinning with the magnitude of what I'd uncovered, I realized that the hunting accident was just the tip of the iceberg. Raymond hadn't just tried to kill me on impulse. He'd been planning it, positioning himself for it, creating the circumstances where my death would solve all his problems and no one would ask too many questions. The devoted stepfather devastated by a tragic accident, the grieving husband comforting his heartbroken wife, the respected businessman who'd lost his beloved stepdaughter to the dangerous unpredictability of hunting season. It was the perfect cover story for the perfect crime. Except Raymond had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated how hard I would fight to survive and how determined I would be to expose the truth once I understood what was really happening. The bullet trajectory that didn't match his story was just the beginning. Over the next 3 years, I would uncover evidence of fraud, forgery, and corruption that reached into the highest levels of Millbrook Falls' power structure. I would discover that my accident was just the latest in a pattern of convenient tragedies that had befallen people who got too close to Raymond's schemes. But that night, lying in the dark with my arm in a sling and my family convinced I was paranoid and traumatized, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let Raymond Cortez destroy my family and walk away wealthy and respected. I was going to bring him down no matter what it cost me. Because the truth was bigger than just one hunting accident. The truth was about a predator who had been feeding on my community for years, and I was the only one positioned to stop him. The only question was whether I could gather enough evidence before he decided to finish what he'd started in those woods. The breakthrough came 18 months after the shooting, hidden in the most unlikely place imaginable. Raymond's own security system. The man who'd been so careful about covering his financial tracks had made one fatal mistake. He'd installed cameras to protect his construction equipment, and one of those cameras was recording on October 15, 2019. I discovered this purely by accident while helping my neighbor Mrs. Fletcher with her insurance claim after someone vandalized her garden shed. She mentioned that Raymond had installed security cameras around his equipment yard the previous year and that the police had asked to review the footage after some tools went missing from a nearby construction site. Funny thing is, Mrs. Fletcher said, sipping her tea while we filled out paperwork at her kitchen table, those cameras see everything that happens on Copper Ridge Road. Raymond bragged about the range on them when he was trying to sell me a system for my own property.
My blood went cold. Copper Ridge Road was the access route to the hunting area where I'd been shot. If Raymond's cameras had that kind of range, if they'd been recording that morning, I excused myself and drove straight to the equipment yard, which sat on a hill overlooking the valley. Sure enough, I could see the road we'd taken that October morning, winding through the trees toward the hunting grounds. The camera mounted on Raymond's office trailer had a clear line of sight to the entire route. Getting access to that footage became my obsession. I knew Raymond would never voluntarily turn it over, and Sheriff Kellerman had already proven he wasn't interested in evidence that contradicted his narrative. I needed a different approach, something that would force the truth into the open without giving Raymond a chance to destroy the evidence first. That's when I remembered my college friend Marcus Chen, who'd become a private investigator in Seattle after leaving the military. Marcus specialized in corporate fraud cases and had contacts throughout law enforcement. More importantly, he owed me a favor from when I'd helped him through his divorce 3 years earlier. I called Marcus on a Tuesday evening in March 2021, almost a year and a half after the shooting. I explained everything: the inconsistent trajectory, a financial fraud, the rushed investigation, and now the potential existence of security footage that could prove what really happened in those woods. Marcus listened without interrupting, taking notes as I laid out the timeline and evidence. When I finished, there was a long pause before he spoke. "Victoria, if even half of what you're telling me is true, this isn't just attempted murder. This is organized crime with law enforcement corruption. Are you absolutely sure you want to go down this road? Because once we start pulling on these threads, there's no going back." I thought about my mother, growing frailer every month under the stress of their deteriorating finances. I thought about the other families in Millbrook Falls who might be victims of Raymond's schemes without even knowing it. I thought about the bullet scar on my shoulder that ached every time it rained. "I'm sure," I told him. "What do I need to do?" Marcus flew to Montana the following week under the pretense of visiting me during my recovery. To anyone watching, he was just a concerned friend, checking on a shooting victim. In reality, he spent 4 days conducting surveillance, math routines, and identifying weaknesses in his security setup. What Marcus discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. Raymond's camera system was sophisticated but poorly managed. The footage was stored on a local server in his office trailer, with automatic backups uploaded to a cloud storage account every night. The system kept recordings for 2 years before automatically deleting them, which meant the October 2019 footage still existed, but it wouldn't be for much longer. More importantly, Marcus had contacts in the FBI's white-collar crime division who specialized in financial fraud cases. If we could provide them with evidence of systematic bank fraud and money laundering, they would have jurisdiction to investigate regardless of what Sheriff Kellerman wanted. The key, Marcus explained, is getting that security footage legally. If we break in and steal it, it'll be inadmissible in court. But if we can give the FBI enough preliminary evidence to get a warrant, they can seize the entire system as part of a federal investigation. That's where my mother's position at the bank became crucial. I knew she would never willingly betray Raymond, but she also wouldn't destroy evidence if she understood the legal implications of doing so. I needed to approach her carefully, present her with facts she couldn't ignore, and hope that her basic decency would overcome her loyalty to the man who'd been systematically destroying her life. I started by gathering documented proof of the financial irregularities I'd discovered. Bank statements showing mysterious transfers, loan documents with suspicious signatures, investment records that didn't match the actual account balances. I organized everything into a clear, chronological timeline that even someone in denial couldn't dismiss. Then I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 different locations, one with Marcus in Seattle, one in a safety deposit box in Billings, and one with my attorney, Sarah Martinez, whom I'd retained specifically for this situation. The confrontation with my mother happened on a Sunday afternoon in April 2021. Raymond was at one of his golf tournaments, which gave us privacy to talk without his influence. I'd prepared carefully, knowing I would only get one chance to break through her defenses. "Mom," I said, spreading the documents across her kitchen table, "I need you to look at something, not as Raymond's wife, but as a professional who's worked in banking for 25 years. She resisted at first, pushing the papers away and insisting she didn't want to hear any more conspiracy theories about Raymond, but I persisted, walking her through each document, explaining the inconsistencies and irregularities in terms she couldn't ignore as a loan officer. The moment she broke was when I showed her the comparison between her actual signature and the signatures on documents she'd never seen before. The forgeries were good, but they weren't perfect. To a trained eye like hers, the differences were indistinguishable. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hands shaking as she examined the papers. He's been forging my name, but how could he?" I gave her time to process, watching as 20 years of trust and love crumbled in the space of an hour. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were red with tears, but clear with understanding.
My mother agreed, but on one condition. If we were wrong about Raymond, if there was some innocent explanation for everything we'd discovered, I had to promise to let it go and find a way to repair our family. I agreed, knowing with absolute certainty that we wouldn't be wrong. The bank review took place on a Thursday morning when Raymond was in Denver meeting with suppliers. My mother, using her legitimate authority as a senior loan officer, pulled every document related to Cortez Construction's accounts, loan history, and associated financial relationships. What she found was worse than even I had suspected. Raymond's business was essentially a money laundering operation, using construction projects as cover for moving illegally obtained funds. Customer information from the bank was being used to target elderly clients for investment scams. Loan applications were being falsified to hide the true source of assets being used as collateral. Most damning of all, there were electronic transfers from Raymond's accounts to Sheriff Kellerman's personal banking, regular payments disguised as security consulting fees for non-existent services. My mother called me from the bank parking lot, her voice shaking. "Victoria, I've made copies of everything, but we need to move fast. There are automatic alerts on some of these accounts. Raymond's going to know someone accessed them." Marcus had prepared for this scenario. He'd already contacted his FBI friend, Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, and briefed her on the situation. Agent Walsh was part of a task force investigating financial crimes in rural communities, and Raymond's operation fit exactly the pattern they'd been tracking across several western states. Within hours of my mother's discovery, Agent Walsh had obtained preliminary warrants to freeze Raymond's accounts and seize his business records. But the key piece, the security footage from October 2019, required a separate warrant that would take longer to process. That's when Marcus suggested something that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. If we could get Raymond to admit to the shooting on recording, even inadvertently, it would provide the probable cause needed to expedite the warrant for the security footage. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would confront Raymond directly, wearing a wire provided by the FBI, and try to provoke him into revealing details about that morning in the woods. It was dangerous, but Marcus and Agent Walsh would be monitoring from nearby, ready to intervene if things went wrong. I chose to make the confrontation at Raymond's office trailer in the equipment yard, the same location where the security cameras that could prove his guilt were mounted. The irony felt appropriate. I arrived on a Friday evening when I knew Raymond would be alone, doing paperwork and preparing for the next week's projects. My heart was pounding as I knocked on the trailer door, the recording equipment hidden under my jacket feeling impossibly obvious. Raymond opened the door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Victoria, what a surprise. What brings you out here?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the trailer. "About October 15th, 2019. His expression changed immediately, the mask of friendly concern slipping to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "I thought we'd settled all that unpleasantness. You were hurt, confused. These things happen in the woods." "The trajectory doesn't match your story, Raymond. The bullet entered my shoulder at a 45-degree downward angle. You were standing on level ground behind me." He studied me for a long moment, then closed the trailer door and turned the lock.
The click seemed to echo in the small space, and I fought to keep my expression neutral despite the spike of fear that shot through me. "You know," Raymond said, settling into his desk chair with the casual confidence of a man in complete control, "I've always admired your persistence. Even as a kid, you were like a dog with a bone, never knew when to let things go." "So you admit the official story doesn't add up?" Raymond laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "The official story is whatever Sheriff Kellerman says it is. Tom's been very reasonable about the whole situation, very understanding of how traumatic accidents can affect people's memories." "You mean how much you've paid him to be understanding?" That got a reaction. Raymond's smile faded and he leaned forward in his chair. "Careful, Victoria. You're walking into territory you don't understand." "I understand enough. The bank fraud, the forged signatures, the money laundering through your construction company. I understand that I was getting too close to the truth, so you decided to eliminate the problem." "Prove it." The words hung in the air between us, a challenge and a threat rolled into one. Raymond was confident, almost smug, certain that whatever evidence I thought I had wouldn't be enough to bring him down in a town where he owned the sheriff and half the city council. That's when I played my final card. "The security cameras," I said, gesturing toward the window that overlooked the road to Copper Ridge. "You installed them to protect your equipment, but they also recorded our trip that morning. Every detail of what really happened is sitting right here in your office, isn't it, Raymond?" For the first time since I'd known him, Raymond looked genuinely surprised, then angry, then something else, something that looked almost like respect. "You clever little bitch," he said softly. "You actually figured it out." The admission sent a chill down my spine, but I pressed on. "So you're not even going to deny it anymore?" Raymond stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains where he'd tried to kill me nearly 2 years earlier. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, almost conversational.
My hands were shaking, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "Why? Why did you want me dead?" "Because you were asking questions nobody else was smart enough to ask. Because you had your father's stubborn streak and your mother's access to bank records. Because sooner or later, you were going to put the pieces together and ruin everything I'd built." "Everything you'd stolen, you mean?" Raymond turned back to face me, and the mask was completely gone now. What I saw was a predator who'd been pretending to be human for so long he'd almost forgotten the difference. "I built an empire in this town. I provided jobs, donated to charities, made myself indispensable. Your mother's bank access was just one tool in a larger operation. But tools have to be reliable, and you were becoming a serious reliability issue." And now? Raymond smiled, and it was the most frightening thing I'd ever seen. "Now you're trespassing on my property, making wild accusations against a respected member of the community. Anything could happen to someone unstable enough to break into a man's office and threaten him." That's when I heard the sound that saved my life. Car doors slamming in the parking lot outside. Raymond heard it too, and his expression shifted from confident to confused to rapidly calculating. "Expecting company?" I asked, trying to keep the relief out of my voice. The trailer door exploded inward, and suddenly the small space was filled with FBI agents in tactical gear. Agent Walsh appeared behind them, her weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. "Raymond Cortez, you're under arrest for bank fraud, money laundering, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." As they cuffed Raymond and read him his rights, he looked at me with something that might have been admiration mixed with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he said as they led him toward the door. "You have no idea how deep this goes, how many people are involved. You think you've won, but you've just started a war you can't win." Agent Walsh stayed behind as her team loaded Raymond into their vehicle. "We got everything," she told me, tapping her earpiece. "His confession, the threats, even the admission about the security footage. Combined with the financial evidence your mother provided, we have enough to put him away for life." What about the footage itself? We'll have the warrant within hours, but honestly, we probably won't even need it. With his confession and the forensic evidence we already have, the case is solid. As I watched the FBI cars disappear down the mountain road, Raymond's words echoed in my mind. This isn't over. How deep does this go? How many people are involved? I was about to find out that Raymond Cortez was just one part of a conspiracy that reached far beyond Millbrook Falls, and that exposing him had made me a target for people far more dangerous than a small-town construction contractor with delusions of grandeur. But that night, standing in the equipment yard where Raymond had planned my death and instead met his own downfall, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before that October morning in the woods. Hope. The trajectory had finally led to the truth, and the truth, as it turned out, was going to set more people free than just me. Raymond's arrest was just the beginning. Within 72 hours, the FBI had executed search warrants on his home, business, and storage facilities, uncovering evidence of a criminal network that stretched across 4 states and involved over 20 dozen co-conspirators. But what they found in Raymond's personal safe changed everything I thought I knew about my family's tragedy. Agent Walsh called me on Monday morning, 3 days after the arrest. Her voice was tense, professional, but I could hear something else underneath, something that sounded like barely controlled anger. "Victoria, we need you to come to the field office in Billings. There are some things you need to see before we proceed with the prosecution." The drive to Billings felt endless. My mother sat beside me in silence, still processing the reality of what Raymond had done, what she'd unknowingly enabled for over a decade. Since Friday night, she'd aged 10 years. The woman who spent 12 years defending Raymond's honor now couldn't bring herself to speak his name. The FBI field office was a sterile government building that smelled like industrial carpet and strong coffee. Agent Walsh met us in the lobby, her expression grim as she led us through security and into a conference room lined with evidence boxes and computer monitors. "Before we begin," Agent Walsh said, setting a digital recorder on the table, "I want you to understand that what you're about to hear may be difficult to process. We've discovered that this case goes much deeper than financial fraud and attempted murder." She activated the first monitor, which displayed a detailed organizational chart showing connections between Raymond's operation and similar schemes in Wyoming, Idaho, and Colorado. Names, dates, financial transfers, a web of corruption that had been operating for over 15 years. Your stepfather wasn't just a small-town criminal who got in over his head. He was part of a sophisticated network that specialized in targeting rural communities with aging populations and limited law enforcement resources. They'd identify towns with vulnerable financial institutions, place operatives in key positions, and systematically loot everything they could access. My mother stared at the chart, her face pale. How many people did he hurt? We're still calculating the full scope, but preliminary estimates suggest over 300 families across the 4-state region. Total losses exceed $12 million. The number was staggering, but Agent Walsh wasn't finished. She activated a second monitor, this one showing a timeline of suspicious deaths and accidents in the communities where Raymond's network had operated. This is where it gets disturbing. We've identified at least 8 cases over the past decade where individuals who were investigating financial irregularities or asking uncomfortable questions died under suspicious circumstances. Car accidents, hunting incidents, home invasions gone wrong, all ruled accidental or unsolved by local law enforcement.
My blood went cold as I studied the timeline. October 2019, Victoria Ashford, hunting accident, survived. But there were others who hadn't been as lucky. March 2016, Thomas Bradley, car accident in Wyoming. August 2018, Patricia Morrison, home invasion in Colorado. January 2020, Robert Cahill, hunting accident in Idaho. You're saying Raymond's network has been murdering people? We're saying there's a pattern of convenient deaths that eliminated threats to their operation. Your survival appears to be the exception, not the rule. Agent Walsh opened one of the evidence boxes and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. We found this in Raymond's personal safe. It's essentially a hit list.
people who posed risks to the network along with detailed plans for eliminating them. She opened the ledger to a page that made my knees go weak. There, in Raymond's handwriting, was my name, along with a detailed assessment of the threat level I represented. Below that were 3 different scenarios for my elimination, including the hunting accident that had nearly killed me. But what devastated me completely was seeing my mother's name on the next page, with a notation dated just 2 months after my shooting. Diane Ashford, health declining, insurance policy mature, low suspicion risk, recommend medical incident, delayed response to emergency call. My mother read over my shoulder and collapsed into her chair sobbing. Raymond hadn't just tried to kill me, he'd been planning to murder her too, probably by tampering with her diabetes medication or ensuring she didn't receive timely medical care during a health crisis. The insurance policies, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He was planning to collect on both of us. Agent Walsh nodded grimly. The life insurance angle was central to their operation. They'd identify targets, manipulate them into signing policies, then eliminate them in ways that appeared accidental or natural. Your stepfather was particularly skilled at this aspect of the scheme. She pulled out another document, a communication log showing messages between Raymond and his network contacts. The messages were coded, but the FBI's analyst had broken the encryption. What they revealed was a systematic discussion of my elimination, with detailed planning that had been ongoing for months before the hunting trip. They called you the photographer. There are dozens of messages discussing the best way to handle the photographer problem. The hunting scenario was chosen specifically because it would appear accidental and because Raymond had legitimate access to firearms and hunting areas. The methodical nature of it was almost worse than the violence itself. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of desperation. It was a calculated business decision, discussed and planned like any other aspect of their criminal enterprise. But the revelations weren't finished. Agent Walsh activated a third monitor, showing financial records that traced the flow of stolen money through the network. What I saw there explained everything about Raymond's lifestyle and my family's financial struggles. The money Raymond stole from your family, your father's life insurance, your college fund, your mother's retirement savings, it wasn't lost in bad investments. It was systematically funneled into this network's operations and used to fund similar schemes in other communities. The total from our family alone was over $800,000. Money that should have secured my mother's retirement, paid for my education, and honored my father's memory had instead been used to destroy other families across the region. "Can we get any of it back?" my mother asked, her voice hollow. "Some of it, yes. We've frozen assets and identified recovery targets, but a significant portion has been moved offshore or converted to untraceable assets. The restitution process will take years, and frankly, most victims will never recover their full losses." Agent Walsh closed the evidence files and looked directly at me. "Victoria, there's something else you need to know. Your survival has made you a target for the remaining network members. Raymond wasn't the leader of this operation. He was middle management. The people above him have resources and connections we're still trying to identify." The implication hit me like a physical blow. Even with Raymond in custody, I wasn't safe. The network he'd belonged to had killed at least 8 people to protect their secrets, and now I was the surviving witness who could potentially expose their entire operation. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "Witness protection is an option, but given the scope of this network and their apparent reach into law enforcement, even that might not be sufficient. We're going to need your continued cooperation to build cases against the remaining conspirators, which means maintaining your current identity and location while providing enhanced security." The next 6 months were a blur of depositions, grand jury testimony, and constant surveillance. The FBI assigned a protection detail that followed me everywhere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living on borrowed time. The network had resources I couldn't imagine, and motivations that wouldn't disappear just because Raymond was behind bars. The trial, when it finally came, was a media sensation.
Raymond Cortez, the respected businessman and pillar of the community, revealed as the cold-blooded attempted murderer and financial predator. The evidence was overwhelming. The confession recording, the security footage, which did indeed show Raymond's truck on Copper Ridge Road at the exact time of the shooting, despite his claims of being elsewhere, the financial records, and the assassination ledger. Raymond's defense team tried everything. They claimed the confession was coerced, that the security footage was manipulated, that the financial irregularities were the result of poor bookkeeping rather than criminal intent. They painted me as a troubled woman with mental health issues who'd fabricated an elaborate conspiracy to explain away a genuine hunting accident. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty.
But the victory felt hollow because Raymond had been right about one thing. This wasn't over. During the trial, 3 potential witnesses died under suspicious circumstances. A key FBI informant disappeared entirely. Evidence that should have led to arrests of other network members mysteriously became compromised or inadmissible. The message was clear. Raymond might be in prison, but the people who'd been giving him orders were still out there, still protecting their interests, still willing to kill to maintain their secrets. That's when I made a decision that changed the trajectory of my entire life. If the traditional justice system couldn't protect the victims or fully prosecute the criminals, I would find another way. I would use my survival, my knowledge, and my platform to expose the entire network and help other victims fight back. I started the Rocky Mountain Justice Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to investigating financial crimes in rural communities and supporting survivors of predatory schemes. We work with law enforcement when possible, but we also conduct independent investigations and provide resources for victims who've been failed by the system. The work is dangerous. We've faced lawsuits, threats, and what I'm certain have been attempts on my life disguised as accidents. But we've also helped recover millions of dollars for victims, exposed dozens of criminal operations, and provided support for families who thought they had nowhere else to turn. My mother became my first volunteer and eventually my closest partner in the work. The guilt she carried over trusting Raymond and enabling his crimes drove her to dedicate her remaining years to making amends. She used her banking expertise to train other victims how to recognize financial manipulation and protect themselves from predatory schemes. She died peacefully in her sleep 2 years ago at 73. The diabetes and stress-related health problems that Raymond had planned to exploit eventually caught up with her, but she lived long enough to see justice served and to know that her suffering had been transformed into something that helped others. We named our victim support program the Diane Ashford Memorial Fund, and every family we help is a testament to her courage in finally choosing truth over comfort. The network that Raymond belonged to is still out there. We've identified operations in over 20 states, with connections reaching into banking, law enforcement, and local government. It's a hydra. Every time we cut off one head, 2 more appear. But we keep fighting because the alternative is allowing predators to continue destroying families with impunity. Sheriff Tom Kellerman was arrested 6 months after Raymond's trial, charged with accepting bribes and obstruction of justice. He's currently serving 8 years in federal prison. 3 members of the Millbrook Falls City Council were also indicted, along with officials in 4 other communities where the network operated. The new sheriff, Maria Santos, is a former FBI agent specializing in rural crime. She's been instrumental in rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community, and she's worked closely with our organization to implement new protocols for investigating suspicious deaths and financial crimes. As for me, I still live in Millbrook Falls, though in a different house with better security and a very sophisticated alarm system. I carry a concealed weapon everywhere I go and maintain situational awareness that would make my old military friends proud. The scar on my shoulder aches when storms are coming, a permanent reminder of how close I came to becoming another name in Raymond's ledger. But I'm not afraid anymore. Fear is what allowed Raymond to operate for so long, what kept his victims silent and isolated. Fear is what the remaining network members are counting on to protect their secrets and continue their crimes. Instead, I'm angry. Productively, strategically angry. Every family we help recover their stolen assets, every predator we expose,
Every criminal we help convict, it's all fuel for the fire that Raymond started when he decided my life was worth less than his secrets. People sometimes ask me if I wish none of this had ever happened, if I wish I'd never gone hunting that morning, or asked the questions that made me a target. The answer is complicated. I wouldn't wish the trauma, the pain, and the years of fear on anyone, but I also can't imagine who I'd be now if I'd never discovered my own strength, never learned to fight back, never found my purpose in protecting others. The bullet trajectory that seemed like a nightmare turned out to be a roadmap, not just for justice for my family, but for justice for hundreds of other families who'd been victimized by predators who thought they were untouchable. Raymond Cortez taught me that monsters can wear the faces of respected community members, that corruption can hide behind charitable donations and friendly smiles. But he also taught me that evil people make mistakes, that truth has a way of surfacing eventually, and that survival isn't just about living through trauma, it's about transforming that trauma into something that serves others. The hunting accident that was supposed to silence me forever ended up giving me the strongest voice I'd ever had. And I intend to keep using it until every last member of Raymond's network is behind bars and every victim has had their day in court. The trajectory doesn't lie, and neither do I. My stepfather shot me, but he didn't break me. Instead, he made me into exactly the kind of person who could bring him down. And that, more than any prison sentence, is the justice he never saw coming. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.